So what if the greatest global health threat is not a virus, it's actually us? Our funding fatigue, our outdated playbook, our refusal to give up leadership, primary leadership to countries actually on the front line, and our addiction to replication over adaptation. Well, this is a different kind of podcast from A Shot in the Arm Media, produced in partnership with the Institute for Global Health Sciences at the University of California at San Francisco, UCSF. And over the course of the next 9 episodes, we're going to take the lead from 2 experts and insiders, a US Global AIDS Coordinator and a PEPFAR Chief Scientific Officer, both of which, of course, are former in those roles. 2 insiders who've written a book. It's not your usual academic book. They've refused to write a comfortable book that gives us all an academic tinge to the whole affair of redefining global health for the 21st century. And they want to bring the recommendations to as wide an audience as possible, breaking out even of our global public health community. Now, the 21st century has undoubtedly seen a lot of achievements: HIV treatment expansion, the near eradication of polio. One might want to include measles, but we can't. Multilateral pandemic preparations, and all of it now is under threat. Something is replacing it. It feels like decay or destruction. But this book asks whether that something has to be decline. There's some other future that we can have. So let's find out more from the authors of Redefining Global Health in the 21st Century. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Mike Reid from the Institute for Global Health Sciences at UCSF, and of course, Ambassador Eric Goosby, my co-host on the Global Health Diplomats and Emeritus Professor at UCSF. Gentlemen, welcome to this podcast.
Thanks, Ben.
Lovely to be here. Thank you, Ben.
So, Mike, why did you write this book? What did you both hope to achieve, and who were you looking to reach?
We wrote this book precisely to address some of the questions that you were asking then. What does the future of global health look like? And I think it was informed by a broader discourse that has been going on over the last few years. You know, what does the next chapter in global health look like? We're certainly coming to the end of one chapter. Some call it the end of the golden era of global health. And I think we were keen to offer an optimistic vision for what lies ahead. So that certainly informed how the conversation began. And then events of the recent past kind of caught up with us in the writing process. I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. And the urgency of finishing the book became all the more compelling.
Yeah. Because, Eric, you both started writing this before the new Trump administration. You know, it was conceived in an era of unraveling on one hand or possibility on the other, which was, let's face it, the reality even before the Trump administration came into power. But I've got to ask, did you need to do much revisioning and re-editing after 2025 and everything that happened?
Well, the truth of it is that no one was expecting as robust a attempt to pull back on the investment that had already been made for years, really going back 23, 24 years, U.S. bilateral relationships with the PEPFAR program, and 1 year less than that with the global health, with the Global Fund for HIV, TB, and malaria. Those efforts all were in flux. Countries were getting to the point where they were not being supported by their legislatures to continue funding them, virtually every one of them. After the economic decline in 2008, we saw a receding of commitment that was a short discussion and a rapid move to defunding strategies that went all over the European capitals and continued. Nobody really came back after that. So we were in a frame of reference that was pulling back, but at the same time, we had to take the investments that had been made with the countries that were chosen to relate in bilateral relationships with the multilateral complement continued, but at the same time, I think countries were in a position where they needed to take more ownership of both costs and management oversight. And that was a discussion that was rumbling pre-Trump.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But so you referred to this golden era of so-called golden era of global health. All three of us were really in it right from the early 2000s in different capacities. What made it, Mike, to your mind, such a moment of creativity, innovation, and most importantly, results? Because the first 2 decades of the 21st century has really seen a transformation in the way we think about health as a global priority.
So I think, and we outline this in early in the book, that one of the characteristics of that era, at least the beginning of that era, was tremendous moral ambition from political leadership, ostensibly in the US, but also globally. There was a recognition that substantial progress could be made on key global health diseases if there was sufficient political will and financial investment. And we saw that. We saw that with the foundation of the Global Fund. And we saw that with the initiation of the PEPFAR program, where political leaders committed substantial, unprecedented resources to solve these particular global health issues. So I think part of what defined the era was that political will and moral ambition. I think the other thing that is worth noting was that there was also a collective consensus that multilateralism could drive progress.
Yes.
That if you brought stakeholders together from across countries, you could see change. And then I think the third thing relatedly was that there was a commitment to the rules-based approach to global policies more generally. If countries committed to investing in programs, they would honor their commitments. And along those lines, there was a recognition of the dividend of soft diplomacy rather than hard diplomacy. Yeah. Something Eric can speak to in much more detail than me. But those are some of the things I think that characterized that era, and there's sort of the momentum that drove progress, not just in HIV, not just in malaria and TB, but in, under 5 mortality and maternal mortality.
Right, childhood vaccinations through Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Yes, yes.
I think the awareness that grew out of the family planning focus of the late 80s and 90s that really focused more on Central and South America, U.S. involvement of that was robust and crescendoed. It was a commitment to the concept of shared responsibility, much more so than we have now. That shared responsibility was the mantra people threw out in making arguments for why we should engage, why we should sustain funding year after year after year, and why a tax base coming out of another country should go to the service needs, even though they were life-threatening, of people who live in another country. For a month, a year, or for many years, was all in the soup and discussed, pushed on, pulled on, refused, and that was kind of the nature of the discourse that President Trump's, thinking kind of plopped into, and fit in a lot of ways the growing dissatisfaction with multilateral outcomes, the falling short of the needs of the infected, impacted populations began to get more understood. We began to see the disparities in one country's response versus another country. And the discussion about the random chance of where you were born determining what you were diagnosed and treated with became something that was unacceptable to the medical profession, certainly, and that dialogue began to permeate into the populations in all the countries. So the discussion was robust at a moment early on, peaked, and then kind of failed, but that's another thing.
Because, the unraveling didn't start in 2025, did it? We'll come on to the why in a little later, but as Mike has described the achievements of that era, what is it that is unraveling now? What's really concerning you about this potential moment of decline?
Well, I'll tell you, the thing that's bothering me the most is that we are trying to fix something that was never operating optimally. The machine never really worked. The dog didn't hunt. Okay, it was really the reality of what medical delivery and service response was in the United States and in Europe. We never have had a medical delivery system that prioritized the diseases that killed the population that you're responsible for, and being able to robustly expand the ability to diagnose and treat those individuals, identify them, enter them in care, retain them in care, converge all those necessary resources over the course of a lifetime. HIV required that you stay connected for a life, for their entire life. And that demand we saw being so unevenly distributed in terms of who was able to identify, enter, retain, and keep people in care and allow them to benefit from the science that we had and knew. That disparity angered many people. I know, Ben, you and Peter were right at the front of that. And what was it? The Vancouver meeting was where the drumbeat got loudest, okay? And
Vancouver AIDS Conference in 1996. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
We were all kittens at that point.
all kids.
Yeah. So there's another feature of the book that you talk about, and it's what one might call the moral injury dimension of this. You dedicate the book to healthcare workers working on the front lines, wherever those front lines are, countries, but also in donor countries, in research institutes. You talk about people who stay not for prestige or profit, but out of a deep sense of calling. These are people absorbing the institutional decline at the moment, or the institutional betrayal, you might argue, at the moment. Why was that so important to you both?
To name them, to honor them?
Yes.
Oh, well, I think, I think in the last 18 months, there has been criticism and unsavory critiques of the global health community from sort of certain political perspectives. There has been criticism that the global health community is overly bureaucratic or is self-serving, and I think that's not true.
No.
And what happened at the beginning of the Trump administration was that many people who'd given their lives to public service because they care about equity and serving underserved communities around the world were laid off in ways that I think were deeply damaging to the US, but also to individuals' own professional careers. And so we wanted to sort of make sure that they were honored and acknowledged as part of the work that we were involved with. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the arc of this podcast series that accompanies the book, Redefining Global Health in the 21st Century. One of the things that I really like is that you say this potential for decline is not a foregone conclusion, that we have other opportunities, and we're going to come on to those in future episodes. What would have to change structurally and politically for that to be true? Eric, I don't know if you've got thoughts on that.
Well, the disconnect with the primary assumption that we've made in developing healthcare delivery systems for populations, the confusion over who in the government and civil society and society in general is responsible for that, kind of primarily, secondarily, what are kind of tertiary relationships with medical delivery systems, who needs to contribute, be the resource motor, how does that maldistribution of availability of access and retention play out in your population? How does that relate to the diseases that kill your people in your population? And are you aligned with diagnostic and pharmaceutical procurement distribution systems that reflect those diagnoses and those diseases? Moving backward into making access the key measure of your ability to deliver successfully to the entire population. Who's responsible for that? And the abdication of that responsibility is at the core of the unraveling. And I think if we don't acknowledge and go back to that basic mistake, we did it in every country we can name, almost. Every country did not complete the commitments that were inherent in those relationships and didn't take the seriousness of trying to be the counter to the progression of a disease in the population or an individual seriously. The government did not own that. And that disconnect allowed the extraordinary motor that medical care represents to economies to take flight without any regard for the service needs of the population that they're there to respond to. That got disconnected. And in that disconnect, I think profit margin expansion became the primary motivator, and that's what happened with the United States managed care takeover. And it was what happened in Europe in different time frames, but basically the same sequence of missed opportunities. And I believe a core lack of acceptance, ownership of this responsibility in the profession of medicine. That includes nurses, all the health allied, everybody. But the doctor part of this equation did not hold the turf, did not protect and keep the needs of their patient population paramount in how they demanded that their medical schools and their medical delivery system respond to their patients' needs. They abdicated the relationship. It's a sad story, really, but one that we haven't told. But we need to put that in to understand kind of the carnage that followed.
Well, and we'll come back to the role of healthcare professionals and particularly doctors in a later episode, because they were absolutely one of the targets, I think, even from the very start. But Mike, picking up on what Eric said, you argue very vigorously, very colorfully, actually, about the global health movement having to be trapped at this moment, in this time, and falling into an era of decline. And you call that decline, and I'm going to make you describe what this is, the Enshittification. And there's a lovely quote from the book, which I'd love to share with you both again. Like the digital platforms that gave rise to the term Enshittification, once effective systems risk gradual erosion as external pressures, rigid mandates, and outdated paradigms take hold. Can you explain more about the Enshittification? And I just love that word. I'll say it again, Enshittification.
So we use the term Enshittification as a metaphor for global health decline. And it comes from the writing of a tech author, Cory Doctorow, who originally used the term Enshittification to describe digital platforms like Facebook and
Twitter, perhaps?
Twitter, that start out serving their users well and gradually decline or decay over time as the incentives shift towards extraction, bureaucracy, and self-preservation. You see that in many digital platforms. And I think that the question that we raise in the prologue is, are we on the brink of the Enshittification? Have we reached a point where all of this investment over the last 20 years is on the brink of decay and decline? And if it's not sustained, if it's not responsibly moved forward in a way that leads to ongoing high quality programming, then I think, yes, that's the concern. I will say that we don't say that we have entered the Enshittification. We raise the question: Are we about?
Are we about?
Yeah. Two additional reflections. I think history may look back and say, who was the architect of the global health Enshittification? And I almost, without shadow of a doubt, I think history will reflect that Brad Smith, who is the political appointee for the Bureau of Global Health Security and Diplomacy, has
in the Trump administration.
Has really embodied a lot of what that decline could look like by substantially withdrawing funding, by moving things forward at a rapid speed whilst undermining the integrity of programming. But maybe I can just zoom out a little bit, because you asked Eric a question I wanted to also ask.
Oh, okay.
May I?
Of course.
I think you asked, like, how do we get to this moment, right? And I just wanted to sort of zoom out. Eric brought us, into the particulars of education and medical education. I wanted to sort of reflect a little bit at a more academic, higher level, if that's the right framing. As you may know, one of the sort of seminal books in scientific theory is Thomas Kuhn's Structures of Scientific Revolution, right? And he, in that book, talks about how there are periods of normal science that are interjected with subtle shifts, and then there are periods where there are substantial changes, paradigm shifts, where there is a departure from the way normal science is done into something new. And I think that's what we're asking right now. Are we on the brink of a paradigm shift in global health? That doesn't mean the Enshittification is upon us, but it does mean that something different, radically different, is going to emerge from this moment. And I think what we try and outline in the book is that, like, actually, that new vision for global health probably requires several interrelated paradigm shifts happening at the same time. And I'm happy to speak to that, or maybe you're going to ask questions.
Yeah, no, you can guarantee I will do. It's a really important clarification, because one of the things you are both saying is we don't go back to how things were. That was then, this is now. And what we need is some degree of innovation and rethinking and retooling to take us into the next few decades. At the 38,000 foot level, what would you say are the key features of what you think is possible? Eric, I don't want to kick off, and then Mike.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I still have a optimistic vision of getting it all. I still want it all, because the need is still in front of us, and the people who hold that need deserve a response. We know how to do it. It's within the science that we know, and we have maldistribution of access, availability, and retention. And as stupid as that sounds, and as silly as that is, to preclude your ability to deliver the goods, deliver the system that will indeed sustain or improve the health of the population that you've assumed responsibility for. Realigning those areas of responsibility so expectation, objectives, and governance decisions are all focused on achieving the outcome that changes the likelihood that you are going to die from hypertension, diabetes, or coronary artery disease, HIV, TB, or malaria. Any of those diseases, all of which we have figured out how to tell you you've got it and to treat it, have not matched up with delivery systems that can guarantee the person who's engaged with those diseases gets what they need. And I'm committed and convinced that we're smart enough to figure that out, but we have not in just about every example you can put out there. And the reason for that is the lack of clarity in what you're here to do as a physician, as a nurse, as a health professional, and your need to make money precludes everyone's ability to want to deliver the services that the patients expect and need you to deliver. Let's commit to that first without it being displaced ever, no matter what your profit margin pursuit is. We can probably do both much better, but we've got to prioritize what's more important than another in what we pursue. And we don't do that as a society. Society needs to do that, not a profession within it. Yeah. But society needs to say, this is important to us. Our people, we want them not to die from things we can diagnose and treat. Let's commit to that. We don't want them to die from being homeless, starved, or being ignorant. And the government should work very hard to ensure that their population secures that.
Which is a challenge, not just for countries in the global south that are on the front lines. And for those of you listening to this podcast rather than watching it, I had some air quotes there over countries on the front line. But Mike, your sense, I'm going to mix my metaphors here, at the 38,000 foot level, what do you see over the horizon?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just build off of what Eric said. And I think part of why Eric's such a visionary leader at PEPFAR was because he started with the sort of the end goal in mind, right? And I absolutely agree. The end goal is being able to ensure that there is universal access to high quality care for everybody, regardless of where you are on the planet. How do we get there? I think we have to reimagine financing for health programs. Countries, even low and middle income countries, must invest more in their healthcare systems. There still needs to be a responsibility for high income countries to support those low and middle income countries. And we explore in the book what that might look like. I think we need to completely reimagine global health governance in service of ensuring that countries with the greatest needs have a seat at the table and are empowered to advocate for themselves. I think we have to also be thinking about how we do science differently, global health science, in such a way that we're really answering the questions that are most relevant to the populations at greatest risk for morbidity and mortality in underserved settings. In addition, I think there is a need to rethink how we bring new tools, whether those are digital tools, technology, medical devices, to low and middle income countries in ways that can be transformative. So we try and sort of articulate some of what those paradigm shifts would look like over the course of the book. We also just raise the sort of the scepter, if that's the right term, that climate change poses to the current global health ecosystem. That is going to be a massively defining insult, shock to how we deliver all programs moving forward. And so everything that we think about governance, finance, science, innovation has to be framed around how do we address these things in the context of a world that is only going to suffer more as temperatures rise.
There's another project that A Shot in the Arm Media is doing called AIDS 2060, which is a slightly cheeky, disrespectful dig at international target setting. But that project has a deep focus on the relationship between the spread of HIV and indeed zoonotic infections like it and climate. And I know we're going to spend quite a bit of time in this series exploring those connections. I mean, the arc of how we're doing this, to follow your chapters, the next episode is really going to focus on the Enshittification, if you like, and diagnose the breakdown that we're on the tipping point of experiencing. Our episode after that will look at the epistemological foundation. I had difficulty saying that, but logical analyses of things that are very common to my background, academic background in the philosophy of religious thinking. And we're going to look at governance, financing. You mentioned climate, technology. There's one chapter you have on centering self-care, care for the healthcare providers doing the work. And I think that's really important. And then we'll wrap it up with a set of final conclusions. Why did you give the book those titles, those headings, those chapter, as it were, the sort of the map to guide us through a possible near future?
Shall I answer it?
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea was to try to not be so pessimistic with a bad situation that we were honest about it, defined it well enough to talk accurately about it, because we can't successfully move forward unless we really define where we are. And where we are is in such flux that it was very difficult to kind of nail a begin. Here's where we're starting. So we wanted to be inclusive, more comprehensive maybe than we needed to be at times, but that was the that was the kind of attempt at it. And I think it very closely follows the kind of philosophical touchstones that I've seen Dr. Reid here have in all of our interactions. These same themes are present in virtually everything he has done, you know. So I'm proud to be part of that.
I will say that some of those chapters sort of evolved organically, and particularly the last couple. You know, I think even from when we started to have this conversation around a book, I don't think either of us anticipated that AI was going to be as transformative as it has been in society in the US and proposes to be in global health more generally. So we wanted to sort of speak to that, not having a good sense right now for where that will evolve, but the chapter is more an attempt to sort of think about how should technologies be taken to scale in low and middle income countries, rather than here is a use case for AI in one situation or another. And then the piece on the self-care is actually, there are several different components to it, but you're right. Like what one part of that final chapter is just, what does it take to be in this work? How do we look after ourselves and be whole?
Stop burnout.
Yeah, but then another part of it is like, how do we actually empower individuals to have agency over their health, even in settings where their health systems are fragile and vulnerable? So we're trying to speak to a couple of those different things at the end of the book.
I think there is a provocation in the book, which I think I really hope to tease out in coming episodes. You argue basically that the future can't be tied down by bureaucratic solutions, and you particularly point to government bureaucracies in low and middle income countries that maybe don't have the infrastructure to be able to pull some of these things off. It also applies to donor governments, of course. Is this a reform agenda or a transformation agenda? Those two terms have been used a lot in global development in the last couple of years. Do you see a difference in what you're doing, or is it basically the same?
I think the future of global health has to be entirely transformed. Whether we have the political courage to do that, I think, is another question. I think what we're hoping here is to articulate the principles for a future for global health that will enable that transformation. I don't think either of us have got a crystal ball as to what that looked like. And we are not being specific about what are the next metrics that follow after the SDGs, for example. But yeah, no, I think we're interested in transformation in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would reinforce the idea that it's transformative. We are at a point where the malalignment of unmet need with the population, the geographic challenges that access presents to any different to a population in any different geography, as well as our ability to educate and make the knowledge available to all that are, for the health professionals that are in front of the populations that are more difficult to reach. All of that is within the technology to fix. We have done examples of it in pilot type, efforts that have not moved to scale. We have moved some of those efforts to scale, but it is time that alignment with unmet need, population unmet need, the governance system that orchestrates how you define the unmet need, prioritize it, and make the allocation decision has got to be based in the population. And if you disarticulate it from the people that use and need and depend on those services, you create an element of erosion that will continue to play out if you don't stop it. But it's stoppable, it's understandable, and we're smart enough to do it. So I'm optimistic with all of it, but it's a big lift.
And the global south, of course, the countries on the front line are not uniform. There are countries that are very much able to lead their own response and say to folks like us, we need your help here, here, and here. Yep. What we don't need is your influence here, here, and here. And then you have countries, of course, that are at such levels of poverty. There's going to be a need for aid and support. I do wonder, and we'll come back to this, whether that aid and support, let's take Africa, for example, needs to come from the continent as a whole, rather than us in the Northern Hemisphere trying to drive the discussion and ownership. I want to talk also about how this book reads. In particular, Mike, there's something in the chapters that is both endearing but actually profoundly practical. You start each chapter with a letter to your daughters, distilling global health arguments into life lessons. Tell us more about that. Why did you do that?
Well, I did it because that's how I make sense of the work. You know, the reasons why I care about these issues, because I think they are generally relevant to my own personal life. But I also wanted to communicate this thing that is all consuming to me, to my daughters in a way that makes sense for them. And zooming out to 38,000 foot, it is the case more often than not that global health is about problems that you don't have visibility on, not direct line of sight. It's often working with communities that are on the other side of the planet, that quite often are very literally invisible. And if we can do that well, I think it says something tremendously important about us as a society. Global health is where I think academic medical programs can capture moral imagination in a way that nowhere else can. It's sort of like it's like the shopping cart in the Safeway parking lot. You more often than not, that you don't need to return them to the place where they go, right? Somebody else will do it for you. But you do it because it's the right thing to do. And I feel like that's why a lot of us are involved with global health, because we want to do the right thing for the planet, for the shopping carts. You know, that's a twee example, perhaps, undermines the...
Honestly think global health is the most direct way we can deal with this trend to look inwards, trend to be focused within our borders. There's another thing, and I picked it up in a quote, which I'll read to you in a minute, but has me a bit disturbed because you criticize the field, the global health field, but you also, I get the impression, you also have some criticisms of yourselves. And you say, at its best, global health, it's about solidarity. But lately our field has felt unmoored. Budgets have shrunk, and so has our collective vision. Eric, for you first, you know very well what drew you to global health. But does the field still reflect your motivation for being a part of it?
It's always been a fight. The embracing of the idea that the right of individuals have to being diagnosed and treated for a disease that they carry extends out, and I'm happy that we are in a society that has a dialogue about what are the responsibilities of us in our society to the individuals who carry unmet needs in another society. The fact that we see that as something we should have a position on and be responsive for and responsible to is heartening, that those dots are connected. We haven't reacted and responded to those needs robustly or completely or even fairly often. And I think that global health has the unique characteristic of showing you your not just the disparities in the disease that you're focused on between groups, populations, and societies, but also the inhumanity in the decisions that have prioritized responses in other societies, including your own. We, as human beings, do not care a lot about everybody benefiting from a service, a science, a cure, We don't think it's necessary that it all be equally available to everyone. When we look at what we do as humans, we don't act as if we think that's important. And global health keeps that in front of us in a way that other problems don't. And in that sense, this effort is an attempt to try to really align those disparities better, because I think we can travel far with an alignment than we are now. And I'm certain of that, but I am not sure about the resources and motors of resource that we need to identify and retain for a sustained response. Because what we've got now are sticks that have created, toothpick versions of villages that, need to be bricks, mortar, and concrete. And that transition is not an investment that society has said they want to make, is the truth. So we're definitely swimming uphill.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, you're of a different generation to Eric and me, actually, just. Do your motivations for being involved in this field still hold true as you look around what's happening?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a higher calling within medicine than being involved with this work. And I think the need for professionals, communities, politicians, financiers to engage in global health could not be more pressing than at this moment. We haven't solved any of these problems. We still need to commit to solving them. And the only way we'll solve them is with and for those communities. I think a criticism of our book is that it's written by two people from the Northern Hemisphere, right? And I deeply respect Eric's stature and leadership over the last 20 years, but I'm keenly aware that we can't solve these problems from our vantage point. I think the hope is that this book will give readers a lens for seeing how all of us, high-income country, low-income country, health professionals, communities, politicians, financiers, can all and should all play a different role moving forward.
There's one last question which you allude to in the prologue, and that is around, and you both have got criticism for this, of trying to build an apolitical or a bipartisan movement around global health. And I understand that because, particularly in the United States, we need to engage the support of all our elected officials. This isn't one party political ground and the other avoids it. But there is a framing that all of us carry in this movement, and it's especially deep for me as an old school international card-carrying member of the African National Congress in South Africa. And we all talk about the influence of Nelson Mandela. And of course, his vision really and his leadership really came to play at the start of the early 2000s as he was cycling out of the presidency, actually. But you both have framed this book in the example of another freedom fighter from South Africa, Steve Biko. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I was doing my GCSEs in the UK. So I was a 15-year-old. And I watched this movie that I would encourage all of our listeners to watch. It has Denzel Washington and Kevin Kline are the two actors in it. It's called Cry Freedom. And it's the story of this Black medical student from the townships of Soweto who refuses to tolerate the inequities of South African apartheid. Steve Biko goes on to establish the Black Conscious Movement. He is a leading proponent of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, a medical student, then a doctor. And I went to medical school because after watching that movie and just being transformed by the sacrifice and the vision of his life. So the quote that we include in the prologue is a reference to to the call that Steve Biko, has put on all of us to live differently, to kick against the goads, to refuse to tolerate injustice where we see that. And to your preamble, I do think this moment in global health does demand bipartisanship. We have to widen the tent, if that's the right term. I think there is opportunity for inclusion of different and diverse perspectives, from across stakeholders who are engaged in global health. There are some things we just cannot fucking tolerate, though. At this moment, we have to be a community that stands up for the rights of the underserved, that says that fascism is always wrong. Finding that line between being inclusive and also advocating for equity and justice is a line that we all have to find. And that's sort of what we're trying to do in this book. Apologies for my profanity.
No, not at all. I hope we're going to see a lot more of that during the course of these podcasts, because this is not your usual academic podcast series. I would agree with you to a large extent, except I think there has to be a reckoning for what has happened in the United States over the last 2 years, or 1.5 years. We need actually a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that's going to be open and wide enough and supportive enough to enable us to bring in folks from a different, profoundly different perspective, who think that what we're talking about is meaningless and irrelevant and actually dangerous. But there has to be a reckoning for what has happened. How do you navigate this, Eric? Because you're the master diplomat.
I would share the feeling of urgency that we need now more than ever to, I think, be honest about what the problems are, how we have responded to the problems to date, what has not worked specifically, and what our commitment as a global community is to the delivery of healthcare. Do we really feel healthcare is a human right? And is it something that every human should have the ability to access and stay involved with without a huge amount of effort? It should be available. And that is not a commitment we've got anywhere on the planet, certainly not globally. And even where it is in place, it is not optimized. There are many ways to slip through the net. And all of those, as I said in the beginning, we have figured out strategies to respond to all the holes that we now just need to move to scale and make available. But I think there's a core reckoning that hasn't happened in kind of Western society in general, and that is this basic commitment that this is a priority that we agree we all should put our resources toward. We need to have that conversation, back up and commit to that basic core. Is this what we mean to be a human being on this planet? We want you educated, we want you fed, we want you housed, and we want your health covered for the diseases we know how to diagnose and treat, so you can too benefit from the science. And as governments, that is the minimum commitment we need to make to the populations that we're over, as the governing entities, the politicians, the political systems. We don't hold the political systems accountable. That malalignment has allowed for such inappropriate, wrong behavior to continue. And I think it's come to a head with this Trump administration in a way we've never seen before. And it has caused all of us to realize that we have to be relevant in this moment to saying, not on our watch, unacceptable, because we feel the human being can do better, is deserving of better, and we want to be part of achieving that to get it. And the United States as a country should be committed to being a world gradient, to push a world gradient toward that effort, because we can is the main reason. Because there are no other countries that really can play that role. We've abdicated it for 1.5 years, but we had it before. We can regain it. We were the companion of so many of the political decisions in the world because we brought stability to the decision between two bilateral countries. If the United States was present in the discussion, it was more likely to be reinforced and enforced in its implementation. And countries wanted the United States in those discussions. Every one of those discussions participated in more of those type of discussions that had nothing to do with the United States. The United States wasn't really going to have to do anything, but they wanted witness because we brought a backstop to the decision to move forward with it, that they understood, they wanted, and we need to foster that. That to me is the vision of not a United States to become powerful, but a United States to play the role that it must play and can play. Let's play it. Let's play that role. And to me, be that kind of a force on moving toward the greater good.
I mean, I'm really struck by something you said, not on our watch. And I think that truly guides the recommendations and the visions that you both set out for redefining health in the 21st century.
Maybe I can respond to your question as well, though, if I may. Your preamble was, should there be a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, to adjudicate on the decisions of this administration's global health decisions?
Oh, not just global health, a whole range of what they...
Well, I don't feel like I have the expertise to speak to those other areas, or maybe even global health. But I think there's value in bringing some nuance to this conversation as I answer your question. Particularly as it relates to the dismantling of USAID and many of the funding cuts that happened. This administration has articulated very clearly that global health investments have to benefit American citizens. Your dude who works in McDonald's in Michigan has to understand how investing in HIV programs in Malawi makes sense for him. I totally get that. I think that makes a ton of sense. And we, the global health community, have not done a good enough job over the last decade of explaining to Americans how global health makes sense to them. Secondly, this administration have clearly articulated the need for partner governments to invest more in their health programs. The fact that many HIV programs fell apart overnight the moment that we paused HIV programs on January 21st speaks to the precarity of those health systems and their reliance on donor funding. That's a problem, right? And we can all own that.
And then I'll hand back to you. And that is something we're going to come back to. And I know this is a conversation where you and I have, I think they're nuances of differences, but they are differences of views.
Sure.
And which I think the book actually sets out some very interesting ways of addressing them. I think the biggest problem, and what drew me to global health more than anything else, was the fact that as a community, we were absolutely useless at explaining what we were doing.
Yeah.
And I think your book goes a long way to help kickstart that conversation. And I really want to see the recommendations be discussed broadly, be challenged, but at least the thinking and the passion behind it embraced.
That's good. Thank you. I was just going to add, though, that I think that this administration definitely needs to be held to account for some of the decisions that almost certainly have led to the deaths of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individuals, to the exclusion from care for many vulnerable communities around the planet. And I anticipate that the political fallout from those decisions will have repercussions in years to come. Hopefully there will be some kind of scrutiny of that years ahead.
I think it's critical that not to get somebody, but to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Right.
Yeah.
Because this is one of those behaviors that we can't allow it to happen again. We all feel ethically frustrated and diminished because it happened in our time frame.
Right.
We saw something happen that we saw was a mistake, that we knew would have negative repercussions, and it still was allowed to roll down the hill.
Right.
And we did not have the ability to stop it.
Yeah.
It was one of the most frustrating periods, I think, for most of us professionally that we've ever been in. So,
Absolutely. And I think chapter 3 speaks to this in some respects, right? The emergence of new powers and different ways of thinking about global health.
And we will come back to that.
but I've got to say that because of the negative impact this is having and gonna have and has had, it cannot be unquantified and undocumented.
Absolutely.
It has nothing to do with the individuals involved. It's for the greater good. This needs to be marked.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing, viewers and listeners, is that two very passionate, deeply committed leaders in global health. And even if your interests are not primarily global health, I am quite certain that you will find this series fascinating as it looks at the links and the disagreements in approaches that we will need to take. But I think that's it for this episode on the prologue. No, so it's not the end of the episode.
Maybe one thing to say, because this is the prologue, is the price.
And I was going to ask you, is there anything we've missed?
Well, so this speaks to late stage capitalism and our diffidence for multinational, book publishers. This book is too expensive, and we are both ashamed at that. So part of why we want to make it available is this podcast. Ben and I are working on trying to disseminate some of the key messages through other modalities. But hear this from us. We didn't want to make money out this period, but the thought of it being as expensive is a grievance to us.
It's just the Harrison's book up there is in the same. The people who edit that are in the same discussion. It costs a fortune.
Yeah.
And they don't know. Yeah. They haven't figured out anything to do about it. It still costs a fortune.
Yeah. Well, that's the trouble with big publishing, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that is.
But look.
Yeah, anyway.
That's it for this episode, where we've learned a little bit about the Enshittification, that it's a choice, not a destiny. A decline is possible, but it is not inevitable. And the question is, can we get our shit together? Can global health muster the political and intellectual will honestly to transform ourselves? I was going to say, have we missed anything? But I don't think I'm going to do that because
No,
that was a good one. But if you are interested in learning more about the book, recommend you go to the Elsevier website, elsevier.com/books, and then put in your search there, Redefining Global Health in the 21st Century. So, Eric and Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the time.
So, this episode was directed and produced by Eric Aspera of A Shot in the Arm Media. You can find it, and you'll find all the episodes in this series as they are released on a regular basis in A Shot in the Arm's YouTube channel, and we'll have a specific channel for redefining global health in the 21st century. And of course, you'll be able to find it on Global Health Sciences UCSF website. And of course, you'll find it wherever you download your podcasts. So in our next episode, we'll come back to the Enshittification and the old order in more detail, where it came from, what it has achieved, and why it can no longer carry us forward. And we'll be asking what scaling with difference actually means in practice. But in the meantime, to leave you, we've got one concrete ask of you. And it goes without saying, of course, that we would love for you to like and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. But more than that, we would really love you to share this episode with one person outside the global health circle, whether it's family or friends or colleagues who don't work in our field, but who might actually appreciate the arguments that are being set out here. Because really, the book that you've written only makes sense if it reaches beyond the converted. So with that, thank you for watching and listening, and it's goodbye from all of us.
Thank you.